We're going to switch down to the southern kingdom for tonight and talk about kind of a lineage of kings in the south that have a weird description. You know, we usually get he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, or he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. There are three in a row, Joash, Amaziah, and Azariah, that all rule one after another. And they are all said to have been doing what was right in the sight of the Lord, except they didn't tear down the high places. So you have foreign gods being worshipped all over Judah, and sometimes even in the capital city, and sometimes even by the king, but the kings are still mainly dedicated to Yahweh. The national religion is dedicated to our God, to the creator of the universe. But there are all kinds of other gods still being worshipped around Jerusalem and around Judea. Reminds us a little bit maybe of Solomon, who built a beautiful temple for Yahweh, but then built smaller temples for his wives and their gods because he didn't want to offend anybody. So when you see that these guys were good kings, it doesn't mean they were completely good kings. So we won't talk much about Joash. Joash was a younger king. He made some reforms. Probably in Bible class, all you know about Joash is that he made repairs on the temple. So he sounds like he's, doing a good job, but he made a lot of collections. When people would come in to make guilt offerings and that sort of thing, they would pay money at the temple. They would pay temple taxes. They would pay money for the priests to take care of their needs at the temple. Some of that went to the priests, and some of that went back into the treasury. And what Joash did was make a law that the right money had to go to the right places and finally get used to help the temple. The temple was getting in less and less good shape. So he wanted to get that fixed. So they collected a great deal of money and began the repairs on the temple. One of the neat little passages there is that they didn't keep any accounting of the money. The money came in, they put it in big bags, they gave it to the contractors who were working on the temple, and nobody asked any questions because, it says, the contractors were acting completely honestly in their work. So nobody needed to ask any questions. Everybody trusted everybody because it was Yahweh's temple that they were working on. So that's pretty neat. Well, not long after that, the king of Aramea gets an army together, and he goes down and defeats some neighboring kingdoms. And then he comes against Jerusalem. And to get the Aramean king to go away, then Joash takes all that money that's left from fixing the temple, all that the people had donated, and he gives them that, and he gives them the gold out of his own house, and he pays them off to get them to go away. So that's Joash. That's 2 generations above where we're going to end up. Let me read to you a little bit. This is from 1 Kings chapter 15 and 15. And we're not going to get very far before we make a lot of comments. In the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, you remember him, bad king up north, Azariah, the son of Amaziah, king of Judah, began to reign. His other name is King Uzziah. So sometimes he's called Azariah, sometimes he's called Uzziah. I always call him the latter rather than the former. But he was the son of Amaziah. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about Amaziah. He's the son of Joash. So he comes in and takes over. He gets described in the same way. He was a good king, followed after the Lord, followed after God, but did not take down the high places. He was better than King Jehu in one respect. King Jehu of the north, you remember as we were studying what God wanted to do to the household of Jehu, Hosea, his firstborn child, God said, name him Jezreel, because I'm going to get back at Jehu for what he did in the valley of Jezreel. Well, what Jehu did was like kill everybody and their cousin that wasn't necessarily to blame surrounding one of those northern kings that he deposed. killed all of Ahab's family, all of Ahab's friends, his distant cousins. Somebody he talked to on the phone by accident one day. Jehu just cleaned house. So God was going to get even with Jehu for being that kind of person. But here's a little passage about Amaziah. This is Uzziah's daddy. After the kingdom was firmly in his grasp, he executed the officials who had murdered his father, the king. Yet he did not put the children of the assassins to death, in accordance with what is written in the book of the law of Moses, where the Lord commanded, parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. Right? That teaching shows up not only there, but in other places in the Old Testament, that the father does not bear the sin of the son, nor the son the sin of the father. There was a saying in Israel, the father has eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge, which meant basically if the daddy did it, then the kids are at fault as well. And God says, no, you won't treat children that way. They're not responsible for what their parents did. So Amaziah is a better king than King Jehu. He's not as bloodthirsty as Jehu was in the north. He was a pretty powerful guy. He raised an army and was doing really well, but he was kind of a big fish in a small pond. He was fighting smaller countries, smaller armies, and he was winning a lot, so he got full of himself. And he decided that he would send a messenger to the king of Israel and tell the king of Israel, I've beat everybody else. I want you to meet me on the field of battle because I think I can beat Israel. And really neat, you can go back and read all this, but really neat answer comes back. He says, once upon a time, there was a great big tree, a big cedar of Lebanon, and it received a message from a little thistle. And the little thistle said, come and fight me. And so the great big cedar of Lebanon stepped on him and did away with him. And he said, you do well to stay home. Well, he did not stay home. He went against Israel, and Israel wiped him out. So they took him as a prisoner and went all the way back to Jerusalem with him so that he could watch as they tore down a great big section of the wall, of the upper wall in near the temple and near the king's palace. And they went in and they took all the gold out of the temple, and they went in and they took all of the gold out of the king's palace while he got to stand there and watch. They kept him as a captive for a while. I don't know exactly how long. But in the meantime, the people of Judea didn't trust him anymore. And so they decided they needed a new king. And they put Uzziah, his son, on his throne when Uzziah was 16. So there's a chance that he was still king and was kind of a co-regent with Uzziah. So maybe the father and the son were ruling at the same time. Whether the father was in Israel as a captive or whether he was back in Judah, don't know. Eventually, his enemies got hold of him and did him in. But his son Uzziah then took the throne. One of the things that Amaziah did that was kind of weird, he defeated one of the nations nearby, and he stole all of their gods. And he took their gods back home with him, and then he started bowing down and worshiping all these gods that he had stolen. So God sent an unnamed prophet. It just says the prophet of the Lord came and spoke to him and asked him a question. Why are you praying to gods that could not save your enemies from you? Why would that make any sense whatsoever? And yet, that was what he did. So out of the 52 years that Uzziah reigns, he may have been a co-regent for several years on the front, and then later he's a co-regent with his son on the back end because he was stricken with leprosy. Again, he's a guy that is on God's side. On paper, the national religion is worshiping Yahweh. But in reality, everybody has their own high place. So Uzziah is not any better than his dad or his granddad when it comes to actually enforcing the worship of Yahweh. So he's in the same situation. Eventually, God strikes him with leprosy. So he's still the king, but his son takes over for the last several years of his reign and rules the people while Uzziah is in exile because of his leprosy. So you can see the family line, they were in charge for a lot of years, about 120 years represented here. And not much real good came out of it. They escaped from the Arameans for a little while because of what Joash did. But the Arameans, remember, they're turning into the Assyrians. That's the army that's eventually going to completely overrun the north. So, well, why did I tell you all this? We've got 120 years of kings that allowed people to worship other gods in Jerusalem. We've got 120 years of people who were, today in God's temple and tomorrow bowing down to gods that they stole from some other country. We've got 120 years of kings that weren't strong enough to really take care of God's people in Judea, to the point that the Israelite king comes and just takes all the stuff out of the temple home with him. So that's been going on for several generations. Now I want us to go to Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6. So for the last several years of his life, he was in exile because of his leprosy. And Isaiah, when he meets God, when God calls him to be his prophet, happens in chapter 6. And it begins with the phrase, in the year that King Uzziah died. So we have a date stamp on this one. We're at somewhere around 720 BC. So we know about when this happens. Isaiah is going to prophesy for a lot of years. He is a little bit like Hosea in that respect, just lots of time spent. He's about 10 years behind Hosea starting his prophecy. But you've got Hosea prophesying in the north, Isaiah prophesying in the south. Isaiah's with Judah, and Hosea is with Israel concurrently. And they're prophesying. So when you read these, a lot of the things that are mentioned in Hosea are happening at the same time as what Isaiah is talking about in the south. So in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were the seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Does that sound familiar at all? Where else do we see this scene? Revelation, right? When he first encounters Jesus, when he first gets into the throne room, this is what he sees. He sees these living beings, John calls them. And John gives us a little bit more description about what their faces look like. When Isaiah saw them, they were covering their faces, and they were flying, and they were covering their feet. Why would they cover their feet? Isn't that an interesting posture? We've got 2 covering our eyes, 2 covering our feet, and 2 flying. They were covering themselves in the presence of the holiness of God. They needed 2 to fly, but the 2 covering the top, the 2 covering the bottom, they were shielding themselves, covering themselves in the presence of God. And so Isaiah gets to see this, right? I was there the year King Uzziah died, and then I saw these things. Now, think back. He's seeing God, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Right? Joash did some remodeling in the temple. Uzziah's daddy fought a battle, and they came and trashed the temple and took all the gold and all the treasures out of it. We don't know by the time Uzziah dies what kind of shape the temple is in. But the temple is still seen as the place where God would be. Okay? Now there will come a time, not too many years in the future, where God will leave the temple. Right? We sing the song, "The Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him." There was a time when God just left. Okay, it's recorded in Ezekiel chapter 10. These beings with all the wings, they're there at that time too. So Isaiah sees them, Ezekiel sees them, they show up again in the Revelation. They're always surrounding the throne of God. Sometimes they almost seem like bodyguards, like God would need a bodyguard, but they surround the presence of God. Okay? And they keep saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." And at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Now, quick pop quiz. When John is watching and they're singing, "Holy, holy, holy," what happens in response? Does anybody remember? There are 24 elders sitting in seats facing the throne. They all take off their crowns and they throw their crowns in front of the throne and they say, "Blessed are you," right? So they all enter into the worship. So the angels lead the worship and then the 24 elders join in the worship. No 24 elders in Isaiah, but the doorposts and the thresholds are shaking like a giant earthquake is happening in the temple. And the whole temple was filled with smoke, maybe reminiscent of when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies. He would put the censer of incense in there first and let it smoke up the place so that he's not just face to face with God Almighty in the holy place. Some, clouded up. So clouds are full, the temple is full of the cloud. "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Why does he think he lives in the middle of a people of unclean lips? 120 years of kings who are on God's side, but who allow the high places to stay, and people are worshiping other gods. So Isaiah in a day could have easily been in the temple and walked down the street and seen shrines to all kinds of other gods. So he says, "I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live in the middle of a people of unclean lips." Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth. And he said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt has been taken away, and your sin has been atoned for." Isn't that a cool passage? He brings a live coal, he brings fire from the altar and touches Isaiah's lips with it. I'm sure Isaiah at this point is happy that he's in a vision and that this isn't just live. Touches his mouth with the coal and says, "Your guilt is taken away, your sin is atoned for." So it's as if there's been a sacrifice made. Now, when you and I see your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for, do we have anybody that immediately comes to mind? We immediately think Jesus. We jump through all the centuries from Isaiah to Jesus and we say, well, maybe this is more than one prophecy being fulfilled. I don't know that that's what's in that the angel had in mind, but guilt is taken away and sins are atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall we send?" Or whom shall I send? "And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." You know that song? We don't sing that one very often. It's kind of a tough song to sing out of the hymnal, but "Here I am, send me." And he said, "Go tell this people." Now, again, if you're a prophet in the Old Testament, it's the job you don't want. Because he's not going to tell you, "I want you to go visit the king and tell him what a good job he's doing." He's not going to send you to the people and say, "You guys are so good, and I really like all these little shrines you've built. They're really attractive. They really make the walkway up to the temple look so nice. Look, here's something for Baal, and here's one for Asherah, and here's one for Molech. Aren't these beautiful?" Now, your job is not going to be pleasant. Your job is going to be to call them to account for sinning against God. So, "Here I am, send me." And he said, "Go tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull. Close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn to me and be healed. Does that sound familiar? Who said that? Jesus quotes this. Right? Why do you speak to them in parables, so that seeing they will not see, hearing they will not understand? Right? It's what Isaiah said. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Isaiah told the people, 6.5 centuries in advance of Jesus that's who they were. You can hear it all the time, but you don't pay any attention. You're not changing your lives. You're not doing what God's calling you to do. So you're hearing, but you're not perceiving. You're seeing, but you're not paying attention. Tell them that. Understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Then I said, for how long, Lord? Okay, so here's Isaiah, and here's your job, Isaiah. You go tell them that I'm not pleased. You go tell them that I'm not going to give them the knowledge they need because they're not paying attention. Well, how long do you want me to do this? And he answered, until the cities lie in ruins, without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields are ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. Though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. So we even get a happy oracle at the end of this chapter. But you go tell them that they're listening, but they're not understanding. I'm showing them things, but they're not paying attention. And as a result, I'm going to bring punishment on them. And it's not going to end until it's all gone. Look around you, all the stuff you see. When you think, oh, Israel is this, it's going away. I'm not going to let you treat me the way you treat me and keep giving you the gifts that I've been giving you. So Isaiah, your job is to tell the people that I'm tired of fooling with them. About the same time, Hosea is in the north prophesying, Lo Ami and Lo Ruhamah. You're not my people. I'm tired of you. I'm not going to put up with you anymore. Right? So the same kind of message is going in the north and in the south. And whereas the southern kingdom will escape from the Assyrians. The Assyrians never quite conquered Jerusalem. They won't escape the next generation when Babylon defeats Assyria and comes around the corner for them. By then, God completely gives them over and they're conquered by Babylon. But again, this is Isaiah's beginnings are not, it doesn't bode well. But how far in advance of the fulfillment of these prophecies are we? This is about 720 and the final destruction of Jerusalem 587. So 150 years. So we've still got several generations before these things are fulfilled. When you get to chapter 7, and we'll probably talk about it next week, but when you get to chapter 7, you've got that passage about a young woman will be with child and will give birth to the child and will call his name Emmanuel. Right? Isaiah is chock full of messianic prophecy. Well, how far in advance of Messiah are these prophecies? Right? 150 years until Judah gets defeated and taken into captivity. We're still talking about close to 700 years before Jesus comes. And Isaiah is already giving prophecies that when the New Testament church looks at Jesus, they go, oh, Isaiah wasn't just talking about Uzziah, and he wasn't just talking about the kingdom as it was then. He was talking about God sending God with us, the real Emmanuel, Jesus. So they learned a lot from Isaiah. I didn't get the chance to listen to Paul preach. Connie, did you ever get to listen to the Apostle Paul preach? Was that a little before you? When Paul preached, he quoted Isaiah a lot. You can be assured of that. Jesus quoted Isaiah. I bet you John the Baptist quoted Isaiah a lot. That's the one they would have used to make their points about there needs to be a change. John came preaching, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he would, Isaiah would be perfect sermon material for that kind of sermon. Jesus came with the same kind of message. He says the same kind of things that we've already mentioned. He talks about you'll always be seeing but never perceiving. You're not paying attention. So I'm going to give the information to the ones that can take it. I'm going to share it with my apostles. But not everybody gets to know everything about my ministry. So all of those things are wrapped up in Isaiah. We'll take at least a couple more sessions to talk about Isaiah. I say we don't have time. If we made time, we could go all the way through Isaiah, but let's just spend a couple more weeks and look at highlights, and then we'll move on to some of the other prophets. Any questions or thoughts? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just curious, when the Lord told Isaiah to go and tell the people this and that, the land's going to be destroyed. Is that a prophecy referring to the time before Israel, the people, the Jews come back into the land in the early 1920s or so? Because the land was desolate for several hundred years. Is that referring to that?
If it is, it's a secondary prophecy. The immediate prophecy is what's going to happen in 587 BC when the Babylonians come. The Babylonians did not do in the south what the Assyrians did in the north. The Assyrians came in, defeated the north, and then interchanged with them. They sent some of their people to occupy the lands, and they took some of the Israelites to Assyria and sold them as slaves, married some of the women, and just kind of assimilated Israel into the Assyrian culture. That's why we kind of lose the northern 10 tribes. It's much more difficult for someone from the tribe of Judah, or from the tribe of, say, Dan, or one of the half tribes, Ephraim or of Manasseh, to trace their lineage after Assyria. It gets taken away. Now, if you're from the tribe of Judah, as Jesus was, your lineage is more clear. You can follow it back hundreds of years because they never got completely intermarried with anybody else. When the Babylonians came, the Babylonians just wiped stuff out and took you hostage. So there weren't very many people left in Judea for those first 70 years or so. When Xerxes and the Medo-Persians defeat Babylon, then he gives the right for the people to go back and rebuild. So that's when you get over to toward the end of the Old Testament, and you see guys that are going back and rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Remember, a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, and they rebuild the walls. And then God says, well, you've rebuilt your own houses. When are you going to rebuild the temple? And so they set about to rebuild the temple. All of that is 450 years or so before Jesus. That's when it was desolate. That's when they were rebuilding. But there's a truism there. And so some people are looking at the way Jerusalem was, say, after the Ottoman Empire and Christendom went at it during the middle centuries, and how desolate it ended up being up until, I guess, the British started rebuilding.
That's the reason I asked. At that time period there, they said Israel was just desolate. Wasn't very few actual Jewish people in the land.
Yeah, I understand that. I kind of like archaeology. I'm not really as into it as I might like to be, but they say that you could go over there, say, 16, 17, 1800s, and the Bedouins would take you to places. They would show you, this is the area where Abraham lived, and this is the area where Jesus was purported to live. They could show you where Nazareth was, and that kind of thing, but it was pretty wide open. As the population started shifting into that area in the 1800s, early 1900s, there were a lot more bodies. And then, of course, when the UN gave that slice back to Israel, then, just a huge group of people moving in, and a lot of modernization that took place. A lot of money from the West went to Israel to kind of rebuild and build up that infrastructure. So Now it's more modern than it has been in forever. But yeah, it's possible that desolation leading up to this point in time, I mean, those that believe that, we're looking at end times because we're looking at Israel and Palestine in opposition, they'll grab at that pretty quick. I mean, it fits if you make it fit. I don't know if that's what God had in mind at all. But it's there for the picking. Any other questions, thoughts? No? Okay. Well, Lord willing, we'll keep talking about Isaiah some more next week.